Annabelle, sweetie, this table is for family. Why don't you find yourself a spot at the bar? My mom said it with a smile, in front of 30 guests, at my grandmother's 80th birthday dinner. Everyone laughed. A few nodded along like it was perfectly reasonable. Then the waiter placed a $3,270 bill in front of me. Just me. For all 30 of them. I took a sip of water, smiled, and paid every cent. But before I could stand, a voice from the head of the table cut through the room. Just a moment, please. What happened next cost my mother everything she'd spent 24 years stealing. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're watching from. My name is Annabelle. I'm 29 years old. And this is how I stopped letting my family treat me like a guest in my own life. Now let me take you back to Crestwood, Georgia, to the night everything changed. I was 5 when I moved into the Everett house. My parents, my real parents, James and Lucy, died on a Tuesday. A pickup truck ran a red light on Route 9 and hit them head on. I was at daycare, finger painting a lopsided sunflower. By the time they found me, I was an orphan. Richard Everett was my father's older brother. He insisted on taking me in. His wife, Diane, did not insist. I learned that early. Kyle and Madison, their biological kids, had bedrooms upstairs, matching bedspreads, glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceilings, nightlights shaped like animals. My room was in the basement, next to the washing machine. It had a window the size of a shoebox, and some nights the dryer would kick on at 2 in the morning, and I'd lie there listening to it thump like a second heartbeat. Diane never hit me. She was smarter than that. Her cruelty lived in small omissions, the kind no one sees unless they're the one being omitted. 3 plates on the table instead of 4. Oh, Annabelle, I keep forgetting. Grab one yourself. Family photos on the mantel, on the stairwell, on the Christmas card. Kyle grinning, Madison in pigtails, Richard with his arm around Diane. I'm in none of them. When I was 8, I asked why. Diane looked at me like I'd asked why the sky was blue. Those are family portraits, Annabelle. She said it gently. That was the worst part. The neighbors thought she was a saint. That woman took in her husband's niece, gave up everything. I heard it at church, at the grocery store, at school pickup. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't know for 24 more years, was that my parents hadn't left me with nothing. They'd left me $600,000, and Diane had spent every cent. By 16, I understood the rules. Kyle got a car for his birthday, a used Camaro, but still. Madison got braces, a violin, summer camp in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I got the employee discount at Hank's Grocery on Route 12, where I stocked shelves 3 nights a week to pay for my own school supplies. The year Kyle left for college, I asked Richard if there was money set aside for me too. We were in the garage. He was sorting wrenches, not looking at me. I'll talk to Diane, he said. Diane's answer came at dinner. College isn't for everyone, Annabelle. You're good with your hands. Kyle's tuition was $80,000. I know because I saw the check on the kitchen counter, written out in Diane's handwriting, and I remember thinking that was more money than I could imagine. I didn't argue. I applied to the community college nursing program on my own, took out federal loans, and worked double shifts at Hank's every summer. The thing about holidays was the photos. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, Diane staged her perfect family portrait in front of the fireplace. She'd hand me the camera. You're the best photographer in the house, Annabelle. So I'd frame them. Kyle in his college hoodie, Madison with her new earrings, Richard stiff in his flannel, Diane beaming in the center. And I'd press the shutter button and the flash would go off, and the image would freeze them exactly the way Diane wanted the world to see them. A complete family. I wasn't in a single one. But there was one person in that family who never forgot me. One person who set a place for me every single time, without being asked. Eleanor Everett was 80 years old, 5'2", and the only person in that family who made me feel like I had a right to breathe. She was Richard's mother, a retired school teacher with a kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon, and a voice that could silence a room without rising above a whisper. Every Sunday, Eleanor picked me up at 9 sharp. We'd drive to her cottage on Maple Hill, and she'd teach me how to bake, apple crumble, buttermilk biscuits, peach cobbler from scratch. While the oven hummed, she'd tell me stories about my father. James had your eyes, she'd say, rolling dough with flour-dusted hands. And your mother, Lucy smiled like sunshine after rain. You have that same smile, Annabelle. I'd hold those words like coins in my pocket, turning them over during the long nights in the basement room. Diane hated my Sundays with Eleanor. She's 80 years old, Annabelle. You're wearing her out. She's fragile. Don't bother her with your problems. Maybe skip this week. She needs rest. I always went anyway, until the year Diane told me if I kept making trouble, she'd tell Eleanor I didn't want to come anymore. I was 14. I believed her. So I started asking permission first, and permission was not always granted. One Sunday, just before I turned 17, Eleanor said something I didn't understand. She put down her rolling pin, looked at me with eyes that were sharp and sad at the same time. Your parents loved you enough to plan ahead, Annabelle. Don't ever forget that. I nodded like I knew what she meant. I didn't. Not for another 12 years. But Eleanor knew exactly what she was telling me, and she was already making plans of her own. Fast forward to now. I'm 29, a registered nurse at Crestwood Community Hospital, living alone in a one-bedroom apartment above the laundromat on Cherry Street. It's small, it's loud on wash days, and it's mine. Eleanor's health has slowed in the past year. Her knees ache, she gets winded on stairs, but her mind is a steel trap, and every Sunday I still drive to Maple Hill. The rest of the family knows what Eleanor has. The cottage, her late husband's pension, savings accounts built over 50 years. Somewhere north of $1 million. In a town like Crestwood, that's a fortune. Diane started her campaign around January. Subtle at first. She'd visit Eleanor with flowers from the shop and happen to mention how difficult I'd been lately. How I'd been distant. How I probably only visited for the inheritance. Kyle backed her up at Easter brunch. Grandma, you know Annabelle's not technically family. Legally, I mean. Madison posted Instagram stories. Selfies with Eleanor, captions reading, "Blood is thicker than water," with a heart emoji. She tagged everyone except me. Then came the phone call. A Thursday evening, late March. Richard's name on my screen. He hadn't called me in 4 months. Annabelle. His voice sounded rehearsed, tired. About Mom's birthday dinner this Saturday. Maybe it's better if you don't come, for everyone's sake. I held the phone away from my ear, stared at the ceiling. Whose sake, Richard? He paused. It'll just cause tension. You know how Diane gets. I did know. That was the problem. I told him I'd think about it. Hung up. I didn't know then that the phone call was part of something much bigger. A plan already weeks in motion. I called Eleanor the next morning. She picked up on the first ring, like she'd been waiting. Grandma, Richard said maybe I shouldn't come Saturday. Silence. Then. Did he say why? He said it would cause tension. Eleanor's breathing was steady, measured. When she spoke, her voice was different, urgent in a way I'd never heard. You have to come, Annabelle, no matter what. Promise me. I promise. And wear something nice, something that makes you feel strong. I almost laughed. Grandma, it's dinner. Promise me. I promise. She paused, and I heard the creak of her rocking chair. I love you, sweetheart. More than you know. She hung up before I could ask why her voice was shaking. That Saturday, I stood in front of my closet for 30 minutes. I didn't own much. Nurses don't need a lot of formal wear. But tucked in the back was a navy dress I'd bought for a friend's wedding 2 years ago. Simple. Fitted. The kind of dress that says I belong here without saying anything at all. I put on my mother's pearl earrings. The only thing of hers I had. Eleanor gave them to me on my 18th birthday. Lucy wore these the night she met your father, she told me. I wrapped Eleanor's gift, a hand-bound photo album I'd spent weeks making, filled with pictures of us baking together, printed from my phone. In the car, my hands were steady on the wheel. I knew Diane would try something. She always did at gatherings. A comment here, a seating arrangement there, a reminder of my place. But this was Eleanor's birthday. Maybe her last one. I wasn't going for Diane. I was going for the only person who never made me prove I belonged. The Magnolia Room sits on the corner of Main and Birch. White columns, magnolia trees flanking the entrance, the only restaurant in Crestwood that requires a reservation. For Eleanor's 80th, Diane had booked the entire main dining room. 30 guests, crystal glasses, white linen, a jazz quartet playing low in the corner. I arrived 10 minutes early, placed my gift on the table by the door. Diane saw me walk in. Her eyes tracked me across the room, but she didn't speak, just lifted her wine glass and turned back to a conversation with Uncle Harold. Eleanor sat at the head of the long table. She looked tired, thinner than last Sunday, her cardigan hanging loose on her shoulders. But when she saw me, her face changed. She reached out with both hands. There you are. I leaned down, kissed her cheek, and felt her grip tighten around my fingers, tight enough to hurt. Sit by me, she whispered. I pulled out the chair to her left. Then I noticed the man on her right. Silver hair, gray suit, leather briefcase tucked under his chair. I'd never seen him before. He gave me a polite nod but said nothing. Who's that? I asked Eleanor quietly. A friend, she said. You'll meet him later. Kyle arrived next, laughing too loud about something on his phone. He saw me, stopped mid-laugh. Oh, you actually came. Madison trailed behind, already angling her phone for a selfie with the chandelier. She positioned herself next to Eleanor, framing the shot carefully. I watched her adjust the angle 3 times, each time making sure I wasn't in it. Dinner started. Plates came out. Conversation hummed. Everything felt normal, but in this family, normal was just the overture before the storm. Diane stood up between the appetizer and the main course. She tapped her glass with a butter knife. The jazz quartet stopped. Thank you all for being here tonight, she said, voice honey warm, scanning the room. Family means everything to us Everetts. She lingered on the word family. Her eyes found mine for exactly 1 second. I'd like to introduce everyone at our table. My wonderful son, Kyle. Some of you know he just closed a big deal in Savannah. Kyle raised his glass. My beautiful daughter, Madison. She's been taking such good care of Grandma lately. Madison blew a kiss to Eleanor. And of course, my husband Richard, the backbone of this family. Richard nodded stiffly. That was it. 3 children introduced. The full roster according to Diane. A woman across the table, I didn't recognize her, maybe someone from Richard's work, leaned forward. And who's this lovely young lady beside Eleanor? Diane blinked, then smiled. Oh, that's Annabelle. She grew up around us. Grew up around us, like a stray cat fed on the porch. The woman nodded politely. The moment passed. Then Madison reached across me for the bread basket. Her elbow caught my wine glass, red wine, straight down the front of my navy dress. Oops, Madison pressed her napkin to her lips. Sorry, white would have been a safer choice for you. A few people chuckled. Kyle smirked into his water glass. I looked down at the stain spreading across my lap, dark red, blooming like a bruise. I didn't react. I picked up my napkin, dabbed the fabric twice, and set it back on my knee. Eleanor's hand found mine under the table. She squeezed once, I squeezed back. The main course arrived. Filet mignon, roasted asparagus, truffle mashed potatoes. The smell alone was worth more than my weekly grocery budget. That's when Diane made her move. We need to rearrange a bit, she announced. Uncle Harold needs more room for his chair. Annabelle, sweetie, the bar has some lovely seats. You'd be more comfortable there. It wasn't a question. Kyle leaned back. Yeah, it's not like you're giving a toast. A few people at the far end of the table exchanged glances. 1 or 2 laughed. Not cruelly, just the automatic laugh people give when they don't want to make things awkward. No one objected. I looked at Richard. He was staring at his plate like it held the answer to something. His fork hadn't moved. I looked at Eleanor. Her jaw was tight. Her knuckles were white around her napkin. But she met my eyes and gave me the smallest nod. Barely a tilt of her chin. Wait. Not yet. So I stood up, smoothed my wine-stained dress, picked up my water glass. Happy birthday, Grandma, I said. My voice didn't crack. I walked to the bar at the far end of the dining room. 12 steps, I counted, sat on a stool, set my glass down, and kept my back straight. The bartender, a young guy, maybe 22, looked at me with something between confusion and sympathy. You okay? He asked quietly. I'm fine. I wasn't. But I'd had 24 years of practice at being fine. Have you ever sat in a room full of people and felt completely invisible? Like the air you breathe doesn't count because no one's watching you breathe it? If you have, tell me in the comments. I want to know I'm not the only one. From the bar, I had a clear view of the table. Diane was laughing, refilling glasses, touching people's arms. The perfect hostess. Kyle was telling a story that involved hand gestures and a punchline I couldn't hear. Madison kept checking her phone under the table. Eleanor sat at the head, eating nothing, watching everything. The man in the gray suit hadn't moved. His briefcase stayed under his chair. He cut his steak in precise squares and spoke to no one. 20 minutes passed. Then Madison stood, phone in hand, and walked toward the restroom. She passed right by me, didn't even glance in my direction, like the bar stool was empty. She stopped in the hallway, maybe 6 feet from me. She must have assumed I couldn't hear over the jazz quartet. She was wrong. "It's working," Madison said into the phone. Her voice was low, but the hallway carried sound like a tunnel. "She's at the bar. Mom says one more push and she'll leave for good." Pause. She listened. "No, Grandma doesn't suspect anything. Mom's handling it. We just need her out of the picture before Grandma's lawyer does anything." My hand tightened around my glass. Lawyer. Before Grandma's lawyer does anything. Madison laughed at something the other person said, then walked back toward the dining room without looking at me. I sat very still. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. This wasn't Diane having a bad night or a few too many glasses of wine. This was a plan. Coordinated. Timed. Designed to push me out the door before something happened. Something involving Eleanor and a lawyer. I didn't know what yet, but the man in the gray suit with the briefcase suddenly made a lot more sense. Dessert came, a 3-tier cake with white frosting and 80 candles. Everyone sang. From the bar, I mouthed the words. Eleanor blew out the candles in 2 breaths. The room cheered. Then she leaned toward Richard and said something I couldn't hear. Richard stood, helped her up, and walked her slowly toward the restroom hallway. But Eleanor stopped at the bar. She reached for my hand. Hers was thin, papery. I could feel every bone, but her grip was iron. "Don't leave tonight," she said. Her voice was barely above a breath. "No matter what happens, promise me." "I already promised, Grandma." "I know." She pulled me slightly closer. "Your parents left you more than memories, Annabelle. It's time you knew." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Richard appeared at her elbow. "Mom, the restroom's this way." Eleanor held my eyes for one more second. Then she let go and shuffled off with Richard, her cane tapping the hardwood floor. I turned on my stool. The man in the gray suit was watching me. Not Diane, not Kyle, me. His expression was unreadable, professional, like a doctor before delivering results. His briefcase sat under his chair. The clasp was brass, and the corner of a thick envelope jutted out from the top, manila, unsealed. He caught me looking, gave the faintest nod, then turned back to his coffee. My heart was beating in my throat. "Your parents left you more than memories." My parents died when I was 5. They were 26 and 28. They drove a 10-year-old Honda and rented a 2-bedroom apartment. What could they possibly have left me? Whatever it was, Diane didn't want me to find out. And that told me everything. Eleanor returned to the table. Diane poured her another glass of wine, her 4th by my count. The evening should have wound down. People were checking watches, reaching for coats, but Diane wasn't done. She stood again, glass raised, cheeks flushed. "I just want to say one more thing." She swept her arm across the table. "Being a mother is the hardest job in the world, and sometimes you take on burdens that aren't yours." A few guests murmured in agreement. "When Richard's brother died, we took in his daughter." Diane pressed a hand to her chest. "No one else would. We gave up vacations. We gave up savings. We gave up our space. Our lives, really." A woman near the end of the table spoke up. "That's Annabelle, right? She seems like a sweet girl." Diane tilted her head. The wine made her honest. "Sweet? She's been riding our coattails for 24 years. She laughed, a loose, ugly sound. "Her parents left nothing. Not a dime. We raised her from zero. The room went still. Her parents left nothing. I heard it from 12 steps away, over the jazz, over the clink of glasses, over everything. My mother and father, dead at 26 and 28, buried in Crestwood Cemetery, Plot 14, and Diane was standing in a room full of people telling them my parents left me with nothing. That was a lie. I didn't know how yet, but Eleanor's words were still ringing in my ears. My hand trembled, not from sadness. I'd swallowed every insult for 24 years, every forgotten plate, every missing photo, every she grew up around us. But talking about my dead parents like they were deadbeats who abandoned me, that was the line, and Diane had just crossed it. The waiter appeared at my elbow. "Excuse me, ma'am." He was young, polite, clearly uncomfortable. He set a leather bill folder on the bar in front of me. I opened it. $3,270. 30 guests, filet mignon, bottles of Pinot Noir and imported champagne, 3-tier birthday cake, and every cent of it charged to my name. "Mrs. Everett arranged for the reservation under your name," the waiter said quietly. "She provided your card for the deposit." My card. The supplementary card Diane added me to when I was 17. "For emergencies," she'd said. I'd stopped using it years ago. Forgot it existed. Diane hadn't. I looked up at the main table. Kyle was grinning, watching me over the rim of his glass. Madison had her phone angled toward me, recording. Diane caught my eye and raised her wine glass in a little toast. A salute, a dare. 30 people were watching. I opened my wallet, pulled out my own debit card, my actual card, attached to my actual savings, the money I'd earned stacking shelves and drawing blood and working back-to-back 12-hour shifts. I handed it to the waiter. "Thank you," I said. "You can run this." He hesitated. "Ma'am, are you sure?" "I'm sure." He took the card. I signed the receipt, tipped 20%. From the main table, Diane's voice floated over like smoke. "See? She knows her place." More laughter, quieter this time. A few guests looked away. I capped the pen, set it down, started to stand. And then, from the head of the table, clear as a bell in a silent church, "Just a moment, please," Eleanor's voice. And it stopped the room cold. Every head turned. Eleanor pushed back her chair. The man in the gray suit stood first, offering his arm. She took it, steadied herself, and straightened to her full 5'2". The jazz quartet had stopped between songs. The timing was accidental, or maybe it wasn't. The only sound was the faint clink of someone setting down a fork. Eleanor looked around the room the way she must have looked at a classroom of restless children. Patient, firm, absolute. "Before anyone leaves," she said, "I have something to say. It is my birthday after all." Diane's smile flickered. "Mom, it's been a long night. You should rest." "Sit down, Diane." 3 words. No volume, no anger, just the kind of authority that comes from 80 years of never bluffing. Diane sat. Eleanor turned to me. "Annabelle, come back to the table, sweetheart." I didn't move at first. 24 years of conditioning will do that. Freeze you in place even when someone's reaching out. But Eleanor held her hand toward me, and something in her face said now. I walked back. 12 steps, the same 12 I'd counted on the way out. Kyle shifted in his seat. Madison lowered her phone. Eleanor waited until I was standing beside her. Then she placed her hand on my arm and said, loud enough for every guest in that room, "You belong here more than anyone at this table." The silence that followed was the thickest I've ever felt, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then the man in the gray suit reached under his chair, pulled out his briefcase, set it on the table, unclasped it, and placed a thick manila envelope next to Eleanor's untouched dessert. Nobody was laughing now. Eleanor rested one hand on the envelope, the other gripped her cane. "Diane just told this room that Annabelle's parents left nothing." She paused. Let the sentence sit. "I'd like to correct that." She nodded to the man beside her. "This is Thomas Garrett. He's been my attorney for 12 years. Thomas Garrett stepped forward, adjusted his glasses. His voice was flat, factual, the kind of voice that reads numbers in courtrooms. "James and Lucy Everett established a trust fund for their daughter, Annabelle, in 2001. The principal amount was $600,000. a combination of life insurance payouts and savings. Richard and Diane Everett were named as custodial trustees. The room didn't gasp. This wasn't a movie. But I watched 30 faces rearrange. Confusion first, then math, then slow dawning understanding. $600,000. My parents had left me $600,000. Eleanor's voice cut through again. That money was meant for Annabelle's education, her first home, her future. She looked directly at Diane. Every penny is gone. Diane's face drained of color. Not red anymore. White. The kind of white that comes before a lie or a scream. That's not... She gripped the edge of the table. Mom, this isn't the place for this. Eleanor didn't blink. You chose this place, Diane. You chose to humiliate my granddaughter in this room, in front of these people. So I will set the record straight in this room, in front of these people. Kyle shot to his feet. Grandma, you're confused. You don't know what you're... I have bank records, Kyle. Eleanor's voice was quiet. Final. Sit down. Kyle sat. I couldn't feel my hands. Thomas Garrett opened the envelope and laid a stack of papers on the white linen tablecloth. These are notarized copies of bank statements from the trust account, he said, spanning 18 years. He didn't read every line. He didn't need to. He summarized in the same flat, courtroom voice. $80,000, withdrawn in 2008. Corresponds to tuition payments for Kyle Everett at the University of Georgia. Kyle's jaw locked. He stared at the paper like it might burst into flames. $45,000? 2015. A BMW 3 Series registered to Madison Everett. Madison's phone slipped from her hand. It hit the table with a crack. $120,000 between 2010 and 2018. Home renovations at 14 Birch Lane. The Everett family home, where I slept in the basement. $95,000, various vacation expenses, Myrtle Beach, Disney World, Lake Tahoe. Places I was never invited. The remaining balance, drawn incrementally over 20 years, personal expenditures by Diane M. Everett. 30 people stared at those papers. I watched their expressions shift, from polite dinner party neutral to something harder. A woman near the center of the table put down her napkin and pushed her chair back slightly, as if she needed distance from the table itself. Mrs. Patterson, Diane's closest friend, her church group confidant, looked at Diane with an expression I'd never seen directed at her before. Doubt. Madison's voice broke the silence. That money was for the whole family. It was for Annabelle. Eleanor pointed a thin finger at the stack. Her name, her fund, not yours. Richard hadn't moved. His face was the color of the tablecloth. His hands were flat on the table, palms down, as if bracing for an earthquake. I sat there, tears running down my cheeks. I didn't wipe them. Eleanor let the silence hold for 3 full seconds. Then she spoke again. I've spent 80 years watching who in this family deserves what. I've made my decision. Thomas Garrett straightened his tie. Mrs. Eleanor Everett has formally revised her estate plan. Effective immediately, Annabelle Everett is named as sole beneficiary. The room fractured. Kyle knocked his chair backward, standing up. You can't do this! Madison started crying. Loud, messy sobs, mascara streaking. Diane's voice was a blade. She's not even your real grandchild! Eleanor turned to Diane, slowly, the way you turn to face something you've seen coming for a long time. She is my son James's daughter. She is more Everett than you will ever be, Diane. Kyle jabbed a finger toward me. This is manipulation. She's been working on Grandma for years. Eleanor didn't raise her voice. The only person who manipulated anyone in this family is sitting right there. She pointed her cane at Diane. The tip trembled, but the aim was exact. Richard still hadn't spoken. He sat with his hands flat on the table, staring at the candles, looking like a man watching his house burn from the inside. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. I didn't ask for any of this, I said. My voice was steady. Barely. I just wanted to have dinner with my grandmother. Eleanor reached into the pocket of her cardigan, pulled out a photograph, creased and soft from years of handling. She held it up. A man, young, dark-haired, grinning, holding a toddler in a yellow dress. Your father asked me to look after you, Eleanor said. I'm keeping my promise. I took the photo. My father's face. My face. Together. But there was still more to come. Diane shoved her chair back. It hit the wall with a crack that made the bartender flinch. This dinner is over. She grabbed her purse, then spun toward Eleanor. You're clearly not in your right mind. We'll have this thrown out by Monday. Thomas Garrett reached into his briefcase and produced a second document. He set it down like a man laying cards on a table. Mrs. Everett was evaluated 4 weeks ago by Dr. Fiona Reed, board-certified geriatric psychiatrist in Atlanta. Full cognitive assessment. He paused. She is of sound mind. The report is notarized and filed. Diane's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. She turned on me. Her voice was raw, stripped of honey, stripped of everything except venom. You did this. You poisoned her against her own family. I looked at her from across the table, wine stains still on my dress, eyes still wet, hands still shaking. But my voice came out clean. I've been sitting at the bar for 2 hours, Diane. When exactly did I do that? A sound moved through the room. Not laughter, not a gasp, but something between them. A release. Several guests looked down. One man rubbed the back of his neck. Mrs. Patterson stood up. She walked to Diane, leaned close, and asked in a voice she probably thought was a whisper, but carried across the silence like a gunshot. Diane, is this true? About the trust fund? Diane didn't answer. She grabbed Richard's arm. We're leaving! Now! Richard didn't move. Richard. He looked at her. For the first time all night, something moved behind his eyes. Something that looked like it had been caged for a very long time. No, he said. Not yet. Diane changed tactics the way weather changes in Georgia. Sudden, total, without apology. The venom vanished. Her shoulders dropped. Her chin trembled. Tears pooled in her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was a quivering thread. I gave up everything for that girl. She pressed a hand to her chest. 24 years. My youth, my energy, my savings. And this? This is how I'm repaid? Kyle wrapped an arm around her. It's okay, Mom. We'll fight this. Diane turned to the remaining guests, eyes glistening. She turned an old woman against her own children. This is elder abuse. You're all witnesses. I watched it happen, the room tilting. A few guests shifted in their seats. An older man at the far end frowned in my direction. Diane's tears were good. They always had been. In Crestwood, she'd perfected the role of the suffering mother, and the audience knew the script. It was working. Then Thomas Garrett laid one more document on the table, a thick stack, bound with a clip. He turned it to face the room. These are notarized bank records, he said, withdrawal after withdrawal from the trust account over 18 years. Each one signed by Diane M. Everett or Richard J. Everett. He fanned the pages slowly. Dates, amounts, signatures, page after page after page. The room turned back. Mrs. Patterson stared at the papers, then at Diane, then back at the papers. Diane saw it happening, the shift, the loss of her audience, and for the first time something cracked in her performance. Not sadness, not anger, fear. She realized Eleanor hadn't acted on impulse. This wasn't a grandmother's emotional outburst. This was months of preparation, legal documents, medical evaluations, notarized evidence. Diane had walked into her own trap. Richard stood up. The movement was so quiet, so unlike the chaos around him, that it took a moment for anyone to notice. He didn't push his chair. He just rose, slow, heavy, like a man standing up in water. Mom. His voice cracked on the single syllable. I'm sorry. I knew. I should have stopped it years ago. Diane whipped toward him. Shut up. Don't say another word, Richard. No, Diane. He turned to face her, and I saw something I'd never seen in 24 years. Richard Everett looking his wife in the eye without flinching. Enough. I've been quiet for 24 years. I'm done. He turned to me. His chin was shaking. His hands hung at his sides like broken tools. Your parents trusted us, Annabelle. They trusted me. He swallowed. I failed them. I failed you. The room was so silent I could hear the ice melting in someone's glass. I looked at this man, The man who drove me to school when Diane wouldn't, who fixed my bicycle chain in the garage without being asked, who never once raised his voice at me, and who also never once raised it for me. I know, Dad, I said. I hadn't called him Dad in years. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just the truth, the complicated, tangled, insufficient truth of what he was. Kyle stared at his father like he was watching a stranger. Madison stopped crying. Then Richard reached into his back pocket, pulled out something small and creased, a handmade birthday card, construction paper, childish handwriting. Annabelle wrote this for you 15 years ago, Mom, he said to Eleanor. Diane threw it away. I kept it. Eleanor took the card with trembling hands, read it, and wept. I stood up. Not fast, not dramatic, just stood, the way you stand when you've made a decision that took 24 years to arrive. The room was watching. 30 faces, some sympathetic, some stunned, some already composing the version they'd tell tomorrow at church or the grocery store. I didn't care about any of those versions. I looked at Diane. I'm not going to yell, I said. I'm not going to call you names, but I'm done being the person you wipe your feet on. I'm done sitting at the bar while you decide who counts as family. Diane's mouth moved, but nothing came out. I turned to Kyle and Madison. I don't hate either of you, but I won't pretend anymore. Madison looked at the floor. Kyle looked at the wall. Neither of them looked at me. I turned to Eleanor, took her hand. Thank you for keeping your promise to my dad. Eleanor squeezed my fingers. Her eyes were still wet, but she was smiling. A thin, fierce, satisfied smile. Then I faced the room one last time. 30 people. Crystal glasses. White tablecloths stained with an evening no one would forget. I paid the bill, I said. That's the last thing I'll ever pay for this family. I helped Eleanor to her feet. Thomas Garrett collected his briefcase, tucked the documents inside, and followed us toward the door. Behind us, Diane's voice clawed after us. You'll hear from our lawyer. Eleanor stopped, turned, looked at Diane over her shoulder with the patience of a woman who had been planning this moment for 2 years. Please do, she said. Thomas is very thorough. We walked out into the March night. The air was cold and sharp and clean. The real fight was just beginning. 2 weeks later, Diane launched her counteroffensive. The Facebook post went up on a Tuesday afternoon. 12 paragraphs of carefully crafted victimhood. She described herself as a loving mother who'd sacrificed everything for an ungrateful adopted child. She wrote about Eleanor's declining mind and my calculated manipulation of a vulnerable elderly woman. She used the phrase elder abuse 3 times. In a town of 9,000 people, that post spread like fire through dry grass. By Wednesday morning, it had 200 shares. People I'd known my whole life started looking at me differently. A nurse at the hospital asked me, voice low in the break room, "Is it true about your grandmother?" A neighbor crossed the street when she saw me coming. Then came the legal assault. Kyle hired a lawyer, Brian Prescott, the most expensive attorney in the county, and filed a petition to challenge Eleanor's will. The grounds: undue influence. The claim was that I had isolated Eleanor from her family and coerced her into changing her estate plan. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Madison sent me a text at 11 at night. I still have it saved. We'll drag this out until you're broke. You'll wish you'd stayed at the bar. I sat on my apartment floor that night, reading letters and comments and text messages from people who'd never bothered to hear my side. My savings account had $31,000 in it, every penny from 6 years of nursing. That wouldn't last long against Brian Prescott's hourly rate. But Thomas Garrett had already prepared for this. Eleanor had already prepared for this. They'd been ready for Diane's war long before Diane knew she was fighting one. Thomas Garrett called me on a Thursday. "We're filing a counterclaim," he said. No preamble. "Breach of fiduciary duty. Your parents designated Richard and Diane as custodial trustees. That carries a legal obligation. Every dollar in that fund was required to be used solely for your benefit. And they used it for Kyle's tuition, Madison's car, their vacations. For 18 years. I could hear him turning pages. The documentation is thorough: bank records, withdrawal slips, corresponding purchases. Your grandmother spent 6 months compiling this. 6 months. While I was driving her to Sunday brunch and thinking everything was normal, Eleanor had been building a case. Thomas filed the counterclaim in county court. Breach of fiduciary duty, requesting full restitution of the $600,000, plus interest, plus legal fees. In the same filing, he submitted Dr. Fiona Reed's cognitive evaluation. Eleanor had scored in the 97th percentile for her age group. Sound mind didn't begin to cover it. Kyle's lawyer, Brian Prescott, reviewed our filing. I know what happened next because Thomas told me. Prescott called Diane that same evening. Mrs. Everett, I'd strongly advise you to settle. Diane's answer, according to Thomas, was 4 words. I'd rather burn everything. Sometimes I wonder, if I just walked away that night, taken whatever scraps they offered and disappeared, would life have been easier? Simpler? But then I think about my parents. They set up that fund when they were 25 years old. They planned for a future they wouldn't live to see. They did that for me. I couldn't walk away from that. Would you? I'm curious. Would you fight to the end, or cut your losses and move on? Tell me in the comments. I've thought about this 1,000 times. The hearing took place 6 weeks later at the Mercer County Courthouse, a brick building with columns that needed painting, and a flagpole that leaned slightly to the left. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a courtroom with fluorescent lights and a judge named Harriet Dawson who wore reading glasses on a chain. I won't recount every motion and objection. Court isn't like television. It's slow and procedural and smells like old carpet. But here's what mattered. Kyle's petition to challenge Eleanor's will was dismissed. Dr. Reed's evaluation was airtight. Thomas had documented every interaction between Eleanor and me for the past 2 years. Dates, witnesses, context. There was zero evidence of isolation or coercion. The judge said it plainly. The petitioner has presented no credible basis for the claim of undue influence. Then came the counterclaim. Thomas laid out 18 years of withdrawals. Names, dates, amounts, corresponding purchases. Every page notarized, every signature verified. Diane's lawyer tried to argue the money was used for the household, which included me. Thomas produced my tax returns, my student loan statements, my pay stubs from Hank's grocery. The judge did the math herself. The court finds that the defendants systematically misappropriated funds entrusted to them for the benefit of a minor, Judge Dawson said. The court orders full restitution. $600,000, plus interest, plus Thomas's fees. Roughly $720,000 in total. Diane gripped the defense table. Kyle slammed his palm down. Madison cried. Richard sat perfectly still, hands folded, and said nothing throughout the entire proceeding. We walked out into the parking lot, Thomas, Eleanor, and me. The sun was harsh and bright. Then I heard footsteps behind me, Richard jogging to catch up, holding a battered shoebox against his chest. Richard held out the shoebox. His hands were shaking. This is everything I saved, he said. Photos, your mother's journal, your birth certificate. Diane wanted to throw it all away after the funeral. I hid it in the garage behind the paint cans. I took the box. It weighed almost nothing. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Richard said. I just didn't want you to lose them twice. He turned and walked to his truck. Didn't wait for a response. I stood in the parking lot holding a shoebox full of my parents, and I watched him drive away. That was the last time Richard and I spoke face to face. The fallout in Crestwood was swift and merciless. The way small towns handle scandals they can't ignore. Diane's Facebook post, the one with 200 shares, became evidence of a different story. People reread it through new eyes. The comments section turned. Mrs. Patterson, the church group friend who'd asked Diane about the trust fund at the restaurant, called Diane the following Sunday. I think you should find another church group, Diane. The flower shop on Oak Street, Diane's Petals, the one she'd run for 15 years, lost 1/3 of its customers in a month. In a town that runs on reputation, a court ruling is a scarlet letter. Kyle's real estate firm let him go. His boss didn't cite the case directly. He said, if you can't manage your own family's finances, how can clients trust you with theirs? Madison, who'd never held a job longer than 3 months, lost her only income source, Diane's support. She applied at a grocery store on Route 12. The same Route 12 store where I once stacked shelves at 16. Some things come full circle without anyone planning it. Even after the ruling, Diane's version of events still floated around certain corners of Crestwood. Some people believe the first story they hear, no matter what comes after. I was still the gold digger to a handful of neighbors. Still, the adopted girl who manipulated a sick old woman in a few group chats. Then Nora got involved. Nora Beckett, my best friend since 10th grade, now a reporter at the Crestwood Gazette. She didn't write a puff piece. She didn't write a hit job. She wrote a straight, fact-based article. Court records, bank statements, the timeline. No opinion, just truth, laid out chronologically. It ran on the front page of the Wednesday edition. In a town that still reads its local paper, that mattered. The comments section and the letters to the editor that followed told a different story from Diane's Facebook post. This time, people had receipts. What surprised me most wasn't the public support, it was the private kind. Letters started arriving at my apartment, handwritten, some of them, from other adopted kids in the county. Adults now, sharing stories I recognized like reflections in a mirror. The different rules, the missing photos, the gratitude expected for basic shelter. One woman wrote, "I was told my whole life that I was lucky to be taken in. Your story made me realize that lucky was their word, not mine." In the stack of letters was one I didn't expect. From a law office in Atlanta. A man named Gerald Hayward. He'd been my parents' attorney. "I tried to contact you when you turned 18 to inform you about the trust. My letters were returned. I believe they were intercepted. I'm sorry I couldn't reach you sooner." Diane had blocked even that. The Sunday after Nora's article ran, I drove to Maple Hill. Eleanor was on her porch, rocking chair moving in that slow rhythm I'd known since I was 5. 2 cups of tea sat on the side table. She always set out 2 cups before I arrived. Always. I sat down. Didn't speak for a while. The dogwood trees in her yard were blooming, white and pink, fragile-looking but tough enough to survive a Georgia spring. "How long did you know?" I finally asked. Eleanor wrapped both hands around her cup. 2 years. I found a bank statement in Richard's desk. I was looking for a pen. The account had Annabelle Everett Trust printed right across the top. Balance, $43. She took a sip, set the cup down. "I spent 6 months confirming everything, called Gerald Hayward, contacted the bank. Then I found Thomas." She looked at me. "I waited for the right moment. Diane chose the restaurant. I just used her stage." I stared at the dogwoods. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because if I told you too early, Diane would have found a way to explain it. She's good at that. I needed everything documented first. I needed it airtight." She reached under her chair and pulled out a small album, one I'd never seen. Inside, photographs. Eleanor visiting a cemetery, standing before 2 headstones, placing flowers, white roses. The dates on the photos spanned years. "I go every April," she said. "Your father's birthday." I didn't know that. 15 years of visits, white roses, every single year. I cried. Not the tears from the restaurant. Those had been shock and hurt and anger. These were different. These were the tears you cry when someone proves that love doesn't have an expiration date. "Your father would be proud," Eleanor said. "Not because of the money, because you stayed kind." 6 months later, I stood in the Crestwood Public Library, the same library where Eleanor used to take me for story hour when I was 7, and watched her cut a ribbon. The banner behind her read, "The James and Lucy Everett Scholarship Fund." It was a Tuesday morning. 40 people showed up. Teachers, nurses from the hospital, a few families from the county foster system. Thomas Garrett stood in the back, arms crossed, something close to a smile on his face. I'd used the restitution money, the original $600,000, to endow the fund. Thomas helped structure it as a nonprofit. The purpose was simple: educational support for foster children and adopted kids in Mercer County. Tuition, books, housing, whatever they needed to build a life that didn't require anyone else's permission. Eleanor asked me to say a few words. I'm a nurse, not a public speaker, but I tried. "My parents set up a trust fund when they were 25 years old," I said. "They were planning for a daughter they didn't know they wouldn't get to raise. I'm using that money the way I think they would have wanted, to help kids like me." I looked at the small crowd. Some were nodding. A woman in the second row was crying. "Being adopted doesn't make you less than. Being different doesn't make you a burden. And if anyone ever tells you that the only reason you matter is because someone chose to keep you, remember, you mattered before they chose. You mattered the day you were born. Eleanor clapped first, then everyone else. We served cake afterward. Eleanor's recipe, apple crumble, cinnamon so thick you could smell it from the parking lot. It wasn't revenge. Revenge is loud and ugly and leaves you emptier than before. This was legacy. Diane came to find me 3 weeks after the scholarship launch. I was finishing a 12-hour shift at the hospital. Tired, still in scrubs, hair pulled back, no makeup. She was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against a car I didn't recognize. Not the Lexus anymore. Something smaller, older. She looked different. The highlights in her hair were growing out. Her nails were unpolished. The composure she wore like armor for 24 years had cracked, and what was underneath looked exhausted. "Annabelle?" I stopped, keys in hand. I know I wasn't perfect. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. But I raised you. I fed you. I kept a roof over your head. That has to count for something. I took a breath. The parking lot was quiet. Just the two of us and the hum of the highway. "It does count," I said. "And I'm grateful for the roof. I'm grateful for the meals. But gratitude doesn't mean I owe you my inheritance, my dignity, or my silence." Diane's chin trembled. "Can we start over?" I looked at her, really looked, at the woman who forgot my plate at dinner, who introduced me as someone who grew up around us, who lied about my parents in front of 30 people and called it sacrifice. "No," I said, "we can't start over, but I'm not going to take anything from you, and I'm not going to let you take anything from me. Not anymore. That's the boundary." She opened her mouth, closed it, nodded once, small, defeated, and walked back to her car. I watched her pull out of the lot and turn onto Route 12. I didn't call after her. I went inside, clocked in for the night shift, and took care of my patients. Life continues. Diane sold the house on Birch Lane, the one renovated with my trust fund money. After the settlement, legal fees, and back taxes, she cleared just enough to rent a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. The flower shop closed in August. 15 years of Diane's petals, gone. The sign hung in the window for weeks before someone finally took it down. Kyle left Crestwood without saying goodbye. To me or to anyone, as far as I know. Last I heard, he was selling real estate in Tallahassee. He deleted his Facebook, changed his phone number. Madison got a job at the grocery store on Route 12. The irony writes itself, and I won't underline it. She works mornings. I sometimes see her car in the lot when I drive past. We don't wave. We don't pretend. Richard filed for divorce the month after the court ruling. He moved into the Pinecrest Motel off the highway. He sends me a letter every month, handwritten, on yellow legal pad paper. He doesn't ask for forgiveness. He writes about going to therapy, about the things he should have said 20 years ago, about learning to sit with guilt instead of hiding from it. I read every letter. I keep them in a drawer beside my bed. I haven't written back yet. I don't know if I will, but I don't throw them away. That feels like something. Maybe one day it'll feel like enough. Eleanor is still here, still sharp, still making apple crumble every Sunday. The difference now is that I drive to Maple Hill and park in the driveway without checking my phone first to see if Diane has given me permission. I don't need permission anymore. I never did. I'm not telling you this story to gloat. I'm telling you because for 24 years, I believed that belonging was something other people could give me or take away. That if I was just quiet enough, grateful enough, small enough, eventually Diane would look at me and see a daughter instead of a debt. She never did. And that was never my failing. It was hers. If you're in a situation like mine, where someone uses the word family like a leash, where gratitude is just another name for control, I want you to hear this. Setting a boundary is not revenge. It's not cruelty. It's not even anger. It's the moment you stop agreeing that you're worth less than they've decided. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. You choose who walks through. I still work at Crestwood Community Hospital. I still live above the laundromat on Cherry Street. The dryer downstairs still kicks on at 2 in the morning sometimes, and I lie there listening to it, But now, in my own apartment, it sounds different. It sounds like my life, not someone else's leftovers. On my nightstand, there's a photograph. A young man with dark hair, grinning, holding a toddler in a yellow dress. Behind them, sunlight. Ordinary, beautiful, permanent sunlight. I finally feel like I'm home. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story touched something in you, press that like button so more people get to hear it. And if you've ever been told you should be grateful for less than you deserve, write it down. Put it in the comments. I read every single one, and I promise you, you're not alone. There's another story waiting for you in the description below. I think you'll feel it the same way. I'll see you there.